Hello, it's Dr. Cindy with this week's Mental Health Moment. Today I'm going to talk about faith. Not faith specifically in a religious or spiritual sense, but more generally in the emotional sense of having faith as opposed to fear. Faith is complete confidence in someone or something. It might be reflected in the belief that things will work out okay in a situation we are faced with. We can also have faith in ourselves, believing that we will be successful in a particular endeavor we have undertaken. Faith doesn't necessarily involve the absence of fear as much as the ability to override our fear. When things are going well in our lives, faith is easy to come by as we feel comfortable and confident and at peace and have a general sense that all is right in our world. But I suggest that isn't truly faith as much as it is gratitude. The true test of faith is maintaining peace when things do not seem to be going well, or when we anticipate a challenge or stressor in the path ahead of us. While we often attach our faith to a particular outcome, it actually has more to do with trusting our capacity to get through challenging experiences and knowing that we will be okay no matter what happens. It is confidence in our own resilience and in our ability to handle hardship. Where does such faith come from? Faith and fear can both develop from our experiences and are sometimes two sides of the same coin. How we classify our experiences often determines whether there are ones that contribute to or strengthen our fear or help us develop and deepen our faith. For example, for a first-time airplane traveler who feels nervous about flying, a successful trip has the potential to facilitate them developing faith that they will be safe on future flights. If after getting through the initial anxiety of the takeoff and ascending thousands of feet in the air, they settle into their seat and enjoy the ride, flying will be stored away as a positive experience to draw from. However, if they spend the entire flight gripping the armrests, panicking whenever there's turbulence, and imagining the plane going down, their overarching experience of the flight will be one of fear, and they will not likely develop faith in flying because they were not able to overcome or override that fear. I once worked with a 10-year-old boy who was brought to me by his parents due to concern about anxiety. They described him as being very hesitant and tentative about many situations, and he was socially withdrawn and reluctant to try new things. Somehow in the course of our conversation, it came up that he had never learned to ride a bike. He would see other kids in the neighborhood out and about riding theirs and was never able to join them. Now, while riding a bike isn't an absolutely necessary life skill, in this case, for the boy, it was something that made him feel embarrassed and self-conscious because he wasn't able to do what other kids his age could. From a psychological perspective, whenever there's something we feel unable to do because of fear, the fear can have a power over us that extends beyond that particular situation. It doesn't feel good to live in fear of anything, and unresolved fears can generalize into an overall sense of insecurity and lack of safety. In the case of this boy, I suspected that learning to ride his bike could help improve his confidence and loosen the grip that anxiety had over him. So I sent him and his family home to work on that. As he learned to do what had felt so difficult and scary, his anxiety decreased and he was willing to try more things. Confidence comes from mastering scary situations rather than allowing them to master us. When we learn that we can and do get through hard things, it enables us to develop faith that we can and do get through other hard things. As children, we faced many anxiety-provoking situations and circumstances that we often don't even think about now as adults, specifically because we were able to overcome our fears. I can only assume that initially it must have felt scary for me to learn to walk as a child, trying to balance myself on shaky legs and undoubtedly falling many times. Thankfully, I did not let that fear overtake my willingness to figure out how to walk, and I have no active memory of that process precisely because the fear went away. My only memory of learning to ride a bike is the day that I successfully mastered it. I can picture the entire scene in my mind and remember the excitement and sense of accomplishment that brought me. Yet I know there must have been many falls and failures leading up to that moment of success. I don't remember any of those or the experience of feeling afraid or nervous as I was trying to learn to ride my bike. Now, while it seems beneficial to only recall positive outcomes and not the painful process of getting there, Our selective memory may actually work against us for developing faith. We vividly remember and often re-experience the fears that we haven't overcome as they continue to influence and affect us in our adult lives. But the fears that no longer have a hold on us are largely erased from active memory, leaving us with confidence and assurance in those situations, but not with the frame of reference within which we can fully appreciate what we have accomplished. In other words, because we don't specifically remember the many moments of fear that we successfully overcame, we don't have those memories to draw from to bolster our confidence for other situations that make us nervous or afraid. And since our ongoing fears remain painfully obvious to us, we are often left with a skewed perception of ourselves that emphasizes our vulnerabilities and not our victories. That even makes it difficult for us to decide to make changes in our lives or step outside of our comfort zone. Our comfort zone is where we feel most safe and secure, and so we prefer to stay there even if it feels limiting or confining. That's why making changes entails a leap of faith. It feels risky and uncertain and requires us to ignore our brain telling us, stay right where you are. It is difficult for us to develop faith when we don't recognize or give ourselves credit for the things that we have endured and the challenges we've overcome. When we are under stress, we may not even have an awareness of the full emotional impact the situation is having on us. We're focused on getting through it and taking care of whatever needs to be taken care of to the best of our abilities. When the challenging experience has subsided, we tend to just go back to normal life and not take the time to process and work through our feelings about what we just went through. That means the experience gets stored away with those difficult emotions still attached to it and can contribute to fear and dread about going through tough times again. Think about how much time, energy, and emotion we expend when we're worried about something and are hoping and praying that things will turn out okay, compared to how we react when the situation is resolved. I'm sure the longest prayers start with please God, and the shortest ones start with thank you. Whether it's waiting for the results of a medical test, getting through a turbulent flight, or feeling stressed about giving a presentation at work, we don't spend nearly as much time in gratitude, relief, and appreciation for the positive outcomes as we do in anxiety, worry, and fear as we anticipate what might happen. Instead, we typically breathe a sigh of relief and move on to the next thing. Unfortunately, that means that the predominant impression left upon us by stressful situations is one of extensive emotional discomfort and distress. Let's take the example of how we might prepare ourselves for a major storm. With our advanced technology, we can know now days and sometimes even weeks ahead of us if a big storm is headed our way. With such advanced notice comes our own internal early warning system, as we might start to worry about how bad the storm could be, if we'll lose power, and all of the potential repercussions that might follow. We can spend days beforehand with this both as an act of fear and worry and as a nagging anxiety in the back of our mind. We emotionally brace ourselves, which undercuts the calm and safety that we could be experiencing in those moments before the storm. And by the time the storm comes and goes, we have prolonged the stress well beyond the actual experience of the storm itself. And then once it passes, do we spend the following days dwelling on our gratitude for getting through it? Do we let ourselves actively enjoy the safety and security that we feel again in our lives? Likely not. Devoting so much emotional and mental attention to perceived stresses and so little on the safe, peaceful times leaves us perpetually in an imbalanced and inaccurate mindset about the actual level of safety and security and stress that we have in our lives. The same is true for how we approach our emotional storms. When we live in worry, we are not living in what is actually currently going on in our lives at the time. It's like deciding not to go outside to walk on a nice sunny day because it's supposed to rain tomorrow. Fear makes us live in the sunny days like they're rainy ones because we're focused on what's happening next rather than what's happening now. And it's actually even worse than that. Because our brain always gives us the worst case scenario for potential outcomes, living in fear means we assume not only that bad things are going to happen, but that they're going to be really bad, even devastating. So that's like experiencing sunny days as if they are a monsoon. Worrying gives us the illusion of control because our brain sees it as a problem-solving activity and gives us the impression that if we think about a concern long enough, a solution can be generated and the problem can be solved. That gives us a sense that we are doing something, even though no amount of worrying about a dreaded event actually prevents it from occurring. So shifting from fear to faith is challenging because it feels like we're ignoring the warning signals our brain is sending. Living in fear isn't really any more reassuring or comforting than is stepping out in faith. And we are far better served by directing our thoughts and energy away from what we are afraid might happen to what we know to be true, that we can and do handle the things that happen in our lives, that we overcome hardship, and that whatever storms may come do eventually pass. So living in fear comes from assuming the worst will come true and not giving ourselves credit for being able to handle them. Living in faith is accepting that we can't know what will happen in the future and trusting that whatever happens, we will handle it and get through it. In order to develop faith within yourself, I encourage you to start by reflecting on the challenging situations you have gone through and asking yourself these questions. Number one, what was I afraid was going to happen? Number two, what actually happened? And number three, did I survive? And here's a hint. If you're listening to this, the answer to that last one is yes, you did survive. Then compare what your expectations were with what actually happened. What is your accuracy rate for predicting outcomes? Probably not so great, given that most times, thank God, we don't actually experience the worst case scenarios that our brains come up with. Now consider what your track record is for getting through tough times. Here's another hint. If you're listening to this, the answer is 100%. You have gotten through every single challenging experience that you have ever had in your entire life so far. So this means you are much better at surviving challenging situations than you are at predicting them. Yet what do we usually revert to and draw from when faced with another challenge? We lapse back into imagining the worst as if we have good predictive abilities and put ourselves through an emotional storm about something that usually doesn't come to pass in the way that we've imagined it. Why do we act like we can't handle stresses when we clearly can and do? Part of the problem is that selective memory I mentioned earlier, where we have ready and easy access to previous experiences of things that still cause us pain and are less actively aware of all the challenges that we have successfully overcome. Additionally, anxiety about a dreaded situation we are faced with now triggers the emotional memories of the other times in our lives that we felt that way. And because many of these are connected to our experiences as children, this can make us feel very small and uncertain and vulnerable. We tend to then misinterpret that as our current state of being rather than recognizing that this intensity is coming from those emotional memories of the child in us who truly was small and uncertain and vulnerable in the face of feelings that we didn't understand or know how to manage at the time. So when we're nervous or anxious about a situation in our lives, our reaction is based on our previous experiences of being afraid. Remember that our brain is like a smoke detector. It alerts us when it detects something that could signal danger, and it is up to us to then investigate whether there is an actual danger or if it is just a false alarm. If there is no clear and present danger, there is nothing to be afraid of, and it is then our job to reset our brain and shut off the alarm. This is harder to do when we are flooded with unresolved fear from the past, as our level of fear makes it seem like we are really in danger. Recognizing and preparing for that can enable us to not get so caught up in the emotional experience because we know it's not really about what's going on now. You have likely heard the expression that fear stands for false evidence appearing real. That means that most of the time when we feel afraid, there's no actual threat of imminent physical danger, so our fear is really an illusion concocted by our brain based on our programmed narrative from our life experiences. The story is very compelling because our brain is focused on keeping us safe and will always err on the side of caution in cueing us to perceive danger. And as I've talked about many times, overriding our brain's programming is a daunting task because that requires us to challenge our very primitive survival instincts and hardwired conditioning. That's why it is so important to actively develop and cultivate faith as a counterpart to fear. Think about it this way. When you are faced with a challenge, whose eyes do you want to look at that with? The eyes of the child you were will cause you to feel fearful, overwhelmed, vulnerable, and uncertain. The eyes of the adult you are will enable you to draw from your successes with getting through difficult times with more confidence in your ability to continue to do so now. I think of faith as fear alchemized in the heart. When we connect to our heart, we can silence the alarm set off in our head and actively soothe and comfort ourselves through the challenging feelings to restore a sense of safety, security, and calm. And then we can work to transform our perception of those experiences. We tend to perceive the painful things we have gone through as signs of our vulnerability, but those scars just mean we've gone through some stuff. What if we saw them instead as signs of our strength? Then we could be scarred, but not scared, because for every single challenging thing we have experienced, we lived to tell the story. So we are not, in fact, the child who feels small, uncertain, and unsafe, but the adult who lived through and overcame whatever those scary situations were. But that child who is frozen in time within those challenging feelings doesn't know that everything turned out okay. But you do. So when those emotions arise in you, rather than reacting to them as evidence of current danger, respond to them as a signal that some younger version of you is needing help in getting free from those difficult past experiences. Connect through your heart to that child and let them know that everything is okay. Say to them, I'm right here. It's okay. You're safe now. Breathe slowly and deeply through your heart as you repeat these words, and don't stop until you feel more peaceful and calm. You don't have to wait until you are afraid to do this, and in fact, it's better that you don't wait, because once the anxiety alarm has gone off, it is so much more challenging to establish peace and calm. I suggest setting aside time every day to connect to yourself in this way. You can specifically focus on particular scary experiences that you remember and comfort and soothe the child who went through those challenging times. Or you can just connect to the feeling of fear and provide comfort there, knowing that it will bring relief wherever it is needed. In doing so, you can help the younger versions of you get unstuck from those experiences and truly resolve the feelings that you've been holding on to. As far as that child is concerned, the storm is still going on. Find them wherever they are hiding and help them see the storm is over, the sun is shining, and there's even a rainbow in the sky. Actively recognize and celebrate overcoming something that felt so scary and hard, and thank them for the part that they played in getting through it. Doing this helps the situation be reprocessed as a success rather than a failure. And that's where the alchemy happens. That child is no longer a victim, but a victor. And so are you. It is just as important to also do this work regarding situations we have gone through as adults. Traumas like the death of a spouse, the loss of a job, or the end of a marriage can all be difficult to recover from, and we may feel bruised and battered for quite some time afterwards. We often make the mistake of thinking that once those situations have occurred, the pain is supposed to just go away, and that if we're still in pain, we have somehow failed. Pain is just a signal of where there is a need for more healing. Just tend to that hurt. When an actual storm comes through, we assess the damage, clean up the debris, and make the necessary repairs, which helps fortify our home for the next storm. But we don't do that after an emotional storm. Rather than taking the time to tend to our hurt and support and bolster ourselves around the emotional effects of what we went through, we often just push the feelings aside and busy ourselves in our daily tasks and responsibilities. It's almost like we think if we can get life to go back to normal, then we can feel normal. But in doing so, we are left feeling damaged and more vulnerable to whatever else we might have to face in the future. So, of course, that makes us afraid of each next challenge that presents itself to us. It's hard to have faith that we can withstand another storm when we feel ravaged still by the ones we've already gone through. So, I encourage you to make a list of all the storms that you have weathered. Whatever comes to mind, write it down, no matter how big or small. Then explore whether there are hurts that are still in need of attention. Those might be places where you felt inadequate, helpless, weak, or powerless. Can you comfort yourself through those painful emotions and recognize that feeling inadequate, helpless, weak, or powerless doesn't mean that you actually are? And then can you refocus the lens and recognize that withstanding the onslaught of those emotional storms is actually a sign of your strength? When you look at that list of all that you have withstood, give yourself credit for the fact that you're still standing. A person who has gone through all that you have has every reason to have faith in their ability to get through whatever other challenges might come along. Take time to truly appreciate your resilience in withstanding those storms and take that leap of faith to trust that no matter what lies in the path before you, you can face it as a warrior rather than as a worrier. That's it for this week. Take care.